thesis. Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am Scott Allen, and thanks to my daughter Kate for developing the intro to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast, where we offer a smart, fast-paced discussion on all things leadership. My guests help us explore timely topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. If you haven't done so, please click subscribe so you automatically, seamlessly stay in the know when we publish new episodes. Likewise, please provide me with feedback. What do you like? What do you dislike? And what else would you like to know? And now, today's show. I am excited today. I had just said to him that one of the most magical 4 or 5 days ever that I have experienced as a human on this planet was in the Netherlands, was in Amsterdam. And outside of Amsterdam, I think I visited Haarlem as well, which was absolutely a beautiful little town. And so I'm excited today to speak with Ted Baartmans. Ted is the founder of the Presentation Group, and he travels the world. He travels the globe. He works with any number of different leaders on topics like communication or leadership. And Ted, thank you, sir. Thank you for being here on I think it's a cloudy afternoon in the Netherlands today.
Well, and to make it even better for you, we are living in the suburbs of Haarlem.
Oh, you are? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, it was beautiful. I had a wit beer.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't drink beer, but I prefer the wine. But yeah, the wit beer is very good. Yeah, especially for the Americans. Yeah.
Well, Ted, tell our listeners about your work. Again, like I said, you travel the globe. Every time I see you at some of our annual conferences, you've been somewhere in the world previously, and you're working with leaders, and you're working on communication, you're working on leadership. And so I'd love to today get to some themes from that work, what you see. But for now, let's just do a little bit of an introduction of you.
Okay. Well, you have met me, so you know all about me. I never introduce myself. I always will ask my wife or my children to do so. My background is my father was a geographer, and my grandfather also. So I studied geography. What else is there? And that's physical geography. But I always I'm too curious also to go not into any field without getting deeper or things aside it. So I also studied social geography and then anthropology. And then I thought I should know more about government. So I did governmental studies at the University of Leiden. And then I went to the US to study communication. And that's what I did at Northwestern in Chicago.
Yep.
But also at different locations, because I thought, and this is about 25 years ago, that communication was just starting. And most people I said that I worked in communication thought that I was dealing with telephones and all these things. And
at that time, you would have been selling calling cards or something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they
phone
called
cards.
me before we started. Yeah, I said, well, it's something else. And that's also interesting because you're always looking for your identity, or what do you like to establish, or what do you like to be. And that's what I learned this first lesson. That's what's given to others. Others will see within you what your attraction is to other people or to fields and what you could make or you could see as an exception. So you always try things and to establish things, but others are always guiding. And these people said when I taught also for 10 years just to collect money for all these studies, and we built up our family with 4 children. And they said also you should go into communications more, and also just afterwards to leadership. So it's connected to who you are, what you present, and these people guide you. So then you end up 35 years ago in a firm, also to become a partner of that firm. And they were dealing with aspects of leadership, but more likely with presentation skills for leaders, not managers, people on television, but also in more broader speeches, commercial and for local government or national governments or Europe. And this is how I started about 35 years ago.
So it was really others that were saying to you, you should
Yeah,
go into this work. You should do this work. You're great at this work. That's
yeah.
fascinating. And you listened. You listened because I imagine you would have had somewhat of a pretty clear path at that point with a couple degrees under your belt of geography and social
Mhm,
geography,
mhm.
anthropology. I mean, that's a certain direction.
Yeah.
How has now here's a fun question. How has your knowledge of geography, social geography, anthropology informed your work on communications and leadership?
First of all, with all these discussions talking about climate issues, well, that's the first thing. My background, I'm sitting at a table where also my fathers were sitting, and they taught me everything about the earth and the being of the earth. And so I was the only one that wasn't surprised about climate change because I studied physical geography 45 years ago. And by then already the computer system said, this is what's going to happen, even by
Mm,
these computers at that time. So that fluctuation we see nowadays, that's also predicted within my study 40 years ago. And physical geography is also teaching what I learned from McGregor Burns later on. Change is the only constant factor. And so transformational, his issues about leadership are quite connected to my sense and feeling about the earth. And well, change as the constant factor is, of course, physical geography. So you can't predict anything because you never know when a volcano will come out and change the temperature or whatever. It might be by people, might be by others, but that change and how to adapt change and how to be in these days agile and all these stupid other words, it's all connected for me just by being. Yeah, it's no more, no less. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And
Well,
you should also perceive yourself as a very small particle in the universe.
mm,
You never. That's why I'm quite connected to all these people who write about humble positions. Because what are we? Come
yeah.
on, do me a favor. It's a very tiny part. Yeah.
Well, Ted, the next time I see you, I'm gonna share. I'll bring you a gift next year for the ILA conference because I have now. This is different than geography. This is geology now, but they're close cousins,
They
and
are.
so I collect meteorites. And one of my favorite meteorites was called the Allende, and it fell in Mexico in 1969, and it was the most studied meteorite because they were also bringing back rocks from the moon. So
Yeah.
they've studied Allende like you wouldn't believe. And inside is nanodiamonds. It helped the scientists understand the prevailing conditions at the time of the formation of Earth. And
Mhm.
about it's 4.56 billion years old. And so when you say a speck, yes, we are we are a speck. And it's to hold something that is
Yeah.
4.56 billion years old. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's a mind-boggling experience because it places you in this timeline. It's been on a journey to get into your hands.
Yeah. But also it makes you humble. You see all things. You think, well, there's always another context. There's always another context. And that's quite influential when you do things in leadership or anthropology and all these things.
Yeah.
But it helps really to understand things in a better and proper way. Yeah.
Well, so as you're working with, and we could go in either direction here, Ted. I would love to have this conversation because you're working with individuals around the world in all
Mhm.
kinds of different contexts, whether that's Africa, whether that's South America. I mean, literally, you are on every continent. You are. What
Mhm.
themes are you seeing as you're working with leaders? They could be themes around leadership, or they
Mhm.
could be themes around communication that we could explore. But what are you seeing in these individuals as you work with them? What are a few themes that come up for you?
The first thing is I connected these two words. So we started to think 20 years ago about leadership communication.
Mm,
So because what I do most likely also this morning also is making speeches, in this case for mayors due to COVID. And well, next is December. They try to make speeches also to help people out in their thinking and their knowledge. And first of all, mayors in Holland aren't chosen by people. They are appointed by the king.
Okay.
So they are non-political. So you might see them also as religious leaders. They give meaning to things, and I help them with speech. And there also then it comes what is the right wording, and also
Yes.
I think leadership communication is about what is the right wording about things, how to explain or how to give meaning. This is why it's so important also to study from the anthropology side also, because then you're more related to rituals and things happening and wording, of course, because language is one of the most important things. And that's also quite helpful if you help people out or try to help people out in other parts of the world.
I love that. So the ritual piece is something I'd never thought of, Ted, where you're connecting them to their, if I think of, for instance, the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King in the United States in the context of the US, he connected it right back to our core, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah. And this is also because anthropology is about cultures. Cultures are made by men, people, and that's also what's quite interesting, that people say, well, I can't help it, it's the culture. Well, you are the culture. You represent that culture by the language, by your behavior, by all these things. And that's also quite interesting to take into leadership. How I came up to that leadership issue was that I started to read the books of McGregor Burns, because I didn't understood leadership as such. It was also quite difficult 30, 40 years ago, even in my office, to talk about leadership, because it was always connected to Leiterschaft, the German word. And that referred back to the Nazi regimes, and Leiter was a term used in the Nazi party. And when we copied also the English word, I should say the American word leadership, that was more neutral to talk about something else than management. He wrote these marvelous books about transformational. And then I got connected also to people like Gene Lippmann, Georgia Sørensen, who just passed this year, Gil Hickman. And they also taught me within ILA, but also in other circumstances, that it's all about commonalities and not about differences. And that's also what I learned deeply. If I work worldwide, people are always focusing on how do I differ from people from Ohio. I never differ. I always look for commonalities, and I always make the same issue. When we were young, we had these small, in all cultures, you have these comic books, and then you had to look in 2 pages, 2 pictures, what are the differences? And I'm still working out to teach young children to look for the 275 commonalities, and perhaps you might find some. And that's what I do in cultures also. And then it comes to, and they taught me also a lot, and that's 20 years ago, I think a bit more. I was fascinated by these reconciliation processes in South Africa. So I was requested also to work for the Desmond Tutu Institute. So I did it for nothing, and they gave me back also lessons that I could take in their work and to visit them. And then I came also that these commonalities come from, and that's what all these people worldwide have in common, no matter if I work in Anchorage or I work in deep south in Australia. And that's the phrase of William James. People likes to be appreciated.
Yeah.
All people. And I studied also his work. It was never in his books, these huge volumes. It was in correspondence with students that he wrote this. So people like to be evaluated and respected.
Yeah.
Well, if that's what all humans have in common, and that's what we found about 20 years ago, then it's easy to work worldwide, because this is what we do in Iran, this is what we do in Yemen, in China, in Korea, in Australia. It doesn't differ.
Yeah.
And therefore, also we build in within the work we do, what kind of steps do you have to take then? And these 3 steps are, first of all, understanding, the most difficult one. That's about active listening, but also about how to observe. This is typically anthropology, how to observe without any judgment. just go in and see, and I eat with people. I go to whatever church or temple they are in. I will go just to get a deeper understanding of these people before I can say even anything, because
Wow.
I don't know how to embarrass people. I always try to go into the entrance for women, of course, as a joke, and just to see what they will do. But no violence, no nothing. And then the second phrase is to accept all these things that I've seen without that judgment of my feelings, of my values, or if it's incorrect, of course I can't. But in 99% of these cases, I can accept the situation where they are in.
Yeah.
And then also to respect, and that is also to appreciate these people in their behavior or what they do. And if I take these three steps, understanding, acceptance, and respect, then it's easy to connect to any leader in any position in war zones and it doesn't matter. And then that's the first phrase in which they start to respect me. Then they accept me also, and then they try to understand me and start conversations.
And you build relationships.
Exactly. Yeah. Then you get the common acceptance, common respect. And this is where an article for me is about. Then it comes to trust. And the only issue in my work is always building trust. Because all questions refer to building trust and how to build trust and to make it sustainable. Yeah.
So in that sense, your anthropology, that is directly linked to the work that you do.
Yeah.
It's directly linked.
Yeah.
And I love how you're saying, how you, I forget the exact verbiage you said, but it was, no matter where you are in the world, that's the recipe. That's the recipe is understand. And I'm summarizing here, but you said it just so beautifully. If you're respectful of their rituals and knowledgeable of their rituals and who they are as a people, if you're looking for commonalities, and what are our commonalities and what does that look like? And then understanding of others, acceptance and respect.
Yeah.
And you're well on your way, regardless of where you are in the world.
Yeah. And no matter people know and I know, of course I talk about commonalities, but it's also you said you blurred out that you liked Amsterdam for 5 days. Well, for most people, Amsterdam is the most rotten place on earth. Red light districts. It's all about smoking pot. It's about drugs. We call them soft drugs. You can get them anywhere. And but also the country with free legislation on abortion, for instance, or euthanasia, because we have it in law. And so a lot of people perceive me, of course, as the evil. He's coming from that country but I don't have any meaning of these things. That's where I'm born. And okay, but by understanding them, accepting them, and respecting them, they also come back to me. And like I said, also in countries like Iran or in other countries where people are quite committed also to religion, and also you're always guided. Also in China, I was for over 20 years. People are always by the government guiding you. I've never been in North Korea, but you can get a guide that is your guide for the rest of the time that you're in the country, like I do in a lot of countries. But if I show that I make an attempt to understand these people, know their history, I study their novels, their poems, just to not to say anything about it, but just to understand what is their frame of thinking, and by doing so, I express also a non-violent approach, and that's also what I learned in these reconciliation processes, and it's hard. But forgiveness also then for things is of course an issue also for building trust.
Well, and in many places, I imagine forgiveness is one of the more difficult steps in some cases. Very personal.
But everyone knows that is the answer. It might come after 20 years or 25 years or 30 years, or if you can't forgive, it's over. But it's also part of that acceptance. Yeah.
So Ted, a couple times now you've mentioned Iran, and so Iran is a great example of a country that, at least in the West, or at least in the US, we have been conditioned to be skeptical of, that we have conditioned to view as the enemy. And like any other country, they probably in some cases haven't been innocent of crimes, like any other country in
Exactly.
world history.
Yeah.
So would you tell a couple stories about working in Iran? What might be some misconceptions that people have about working there?
I can't say anything about those people. I can say anything about the Americans. I tried to study them for 30 years. You're just one of them. And I'm still amazed every time. But also to make up generalizations like these about the Iran. The only thing the first time that I went there, it was 13 years ago, 14 years ago. For me, it's Persia.
Yeah.
For me, the first connection is always culture. So I'm very humble if I'm there because they are the founders of maths. They are the founders of the universe, of language, of all the things we have in Europe here were once founded in Persia. They came to us and we borrowed some things and we never gave back. And so for me, it's some sort of the cradle where it all started. So if I'm there, I meet people and I say, I want to go to Persepolis, one of the eldest cities in the world, still existing as some sort of Pompeii here, but Pompeii is just recent compared to these cities. And I just try, if I'm there in a desert, standing at the tomb of Syria, one of the great leaders by then, I feel also that this is a great country where people come from. And that approach also to culture is also looking for commonalities.
Yep.
Like, of course, we have differences in Europe, and we always are quarreling within this EU, like you do in the United States. It's a lookalike of the states. It's not a federal state. But if I look to the work of Stefan Zweig, for instance, it's always looking for what do we have in common in cultures. So I start with the cultures. I start with the history. And then also it is giving entrance to people. And the field I'm in for Iran is most likely on food and nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
Also something in common, but also on food and nutrition, they are ranked in the top 5 worldwide who do the best studies.
Yeah.
So I always think not in that global context of you are the enemy and that switching of who is a terrorist country, the whole idea of terrorist country, it never comes up to me.
Yeah.
And so you deal with people and you try to do the best for these people and to help in leadership. And all in a sudden you see also that people from the government, once you have been keynote speaker there, they also approach you, in the hotels and get after you in a proper way to help them out in issues about how to deal with the UN or how to deal with these and these issues. So I never interfere into any public state or not in China. And why should I?
Yeah.
No, and they approach you to find solutions, to make also commonalities or to find better ways to work.
Yeah. But it's such an interesting perspective, Ted, that you have because you've literally been to all of these places and worked in all of these places and those themes across your work, because essentially your answer right there, you started with the rituals and some of the history. And I imagine that template, what I was going to say is your answer mirrored your template that you discussed previously. Right. And it's a beautiful template. I mean, it really is. Has it ever not worked? Have you ever gone somewhere where some of these, it's been more difficult or it's been a challenge?
Well, one of the aspects I talked over also at the London conference of ILA, it was quite early also, that some processes in getting these steps will take time because people have to digest the things. And that's also referring to the work we do if I talk about North and South Korea. And being in Seoul and talking about issues like these, also people say, well, can you see time also as a friend? That's what I taught in London at the conference. That's also what I learned to have more patience. You can't say these are the steps and it's just ticking the box. And then I just did a presentation also on the last conference in virtual in San Francisco. And then also people say in my work I do in crisis situations, it is not just that you say tick the box and get people connected, and then after riots and all these things, well, people will hug each other and love each other. No, these processes will take time, and every context is also different.
Yep.
So we can do, and I do also a lot of studies. We can make tick the box lists of this is what you should do, or this is a proper step 1, step 2. I learned over all these years, everything is always connected to something else or has angles that are not seen before. And it's just within that uniqueness that it's so nice to work. Because it's sort of puzzle in which you said, I thought there were figures in it, but now it says numbers. But that whole notion of understanding these things take time, talk to many people. Yeah, it's always a puzzle. Yeah.
Well, you'd mentioned crisis communication. Are there some themes or hints that you have for people as they think about navigating, communicating, and leading through crisis?
Well, in most situations, it's always, we have about, I think, 400 or 500 studies on crisis. The first thing that because also then these people ask you to come in as external.
Yes.
That's also a great thing about the work you do. I saw you were also consultant. I'm never into this. I'm not an owner. I'm not responsible. And that overview you can get is also easier to stay out with your values or norms and just to see what's going around. The first thing we train people is to take time. So the first step is always that we, just like a patient, you try to neutralize the situation in which the patient is stable.
Yeah.
To get even a crisis situation, some sort of coma, always take in that emotional part of grief. So also look that grief into it's just like a monster into the mouth. We always say just it's always worth and take time for that grief, what happens, and then also try to find people from without that same area or to see just like an identity, what is the case. And I was very well trained in Northwestern also that what you see is never what is the real case.
Yeah.
It's never at its core, it's never the crisis itself. It's always something else. And that digging out of that needs time. And then you always will find solutions or ropes that you think, oh, if I follow this, and of course dialogues instead of debates on issues. And I learned also a lot from Mark Gerson. You should also interview him if you have time. But he wrote the book also 4 years ago already, The Reunited States of America.
Okay.
Because he also was quite acquainted or related to helping out Republicans and Democrats to come together. He's also by birth, his father and mother were Dutch. So the name Mark Gerson, pronounced in where he lives in Boulder, is the Dutch name Mark Gerson.
Okay.
A famous family in Holland. Yeah. They just flipped away just before the Second World War, which they did well. But his work is also quite influential in the things we do on his dialogues and things. And he also works worldwide with these templates of thinking. And you can use it in Bolivia. You can use it in Yemen. It's some, like I said, it's all about being valued and respected.
Yeah. All about value. It's all about being valued and respected.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To core human needs.
Yeah. Another article that really changed the work we did in worldwide was a study came out in 2003. Yes. By a German team. Quakebeke was the name. I will send you some more details if you'd like.
Sure.
And they found out what is it that people in Europe, especially these refugees that came in, were, of course, they were understood, they were accepted, they got work, but they still felt some sort of, you might say, discrimination or racism, or because they didn't felt respected.
Sure.
And that's interesting. And then they studied what is that kind of respect that they miss, or what they, and then they said, and that's also quite connected to anthropology, most likely it's recognition.
Mm.
And they found out that there are two ways to respect. It's recognition, because you're elder or you're a professor or you live in Ohio, I should respect you, whatever. Then it's more on the position you take, or the age you have, or the experience. But they found out that there is also respect connected to appreciation.
Mm.
And that was for our work also amazing, because that's the entrance also. If I appraise people, it doesn't have to deal with recognition, or no. And you should appraise everyone. So the one who just cleaned my house, I also appreciate her as much as I do with the best professor I had.
Yeah.
I don't make any difference. And it's all about respect, but that respect is exactly the same. It's equal. Yeah. And in dealing with violent situations also, still, if you show respect, appreciation, because of the commitment of people, even if you're dealing with people from Al-Qaeda, and sometimes it's just a bunch of boys just left in a desert situation, and they perceive themselves as acquainted to al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda. I always I appreciate the work you do, because there's always within that behavior, they are not the killers. There's always something that is good, or that's also why they are connected to religions. They try to find beliefs, and within these beliefs, you always will find commonalities instead of differences. And then you have an entrance to drink a cup of tea in a tent and to start negotiation.
Ted, have you ever explored the work of Dia Khan?
Yes.
Okay, so for instance, her two films, White Right, which explores, white nationalists in the US, and then Jihad, which explores, Muslim extremists, and the commonalities between those two groups of men, of what they're looking for and what these organizations are offering. And to your point, you come down to a oftentimes young man who doesn't have purpose, a home, confidence,
Exactly.
and these extremist groups offer that to them, right?
Yeah.
A family, stability, a belief system, and it's in those cases misguided, of course.
Yeah.
But to your point, at the core, you have in some cases, broken young man, oftentimes, right?
Yeah. And that's what you see in politics, in left wing and right wing. That's why I always say it's no left and right. No, it's a circle in which these two combine, because then they start to be extremist.
Mm.
They expose themselves but they are searching for the same issue. Just like you said, they'd like to be embraced by a community, or no matter what a community is, might be nationalist, might be also communist. It is still that community feeling they are looking for.
Yeah.
And that's also the good thing in anthropology and social anthropology. Also, what I learned very early also is that religions are also quite connected to economy systems.
Yeah.
So the religious issues are the issues to held an economy, or to make an economy understandable.
Yeah.
And once you have seen these lines, it's easier to understand people and to respect these people in the way they are perceiving things. Or with one difficulty, of course, I'm a Catholic, so I always say, well, it's not that what people say. I didn't whatever it did to my child, God did. No, it's my and then I prefer these Islamic people and then say you have to cut off the hand like we did in the Middle Ages. Now, you always are responsible for these things. And that's also what I adore in leadership, that responsibility part. What is my responsibility? What's your responsibility? Yeah.
Ted, I have loved our conversation. I really, really appreciate your perspective on this topic. It's just been a fascinating conversation. And I always close out these conversations with a question. And that question is, what are you reading or listening to or streaming when you're not traveling the globe? And I suppose your travel has been diminished somewhat in recent months. But when you're not working with others across the globe, what keeps your mind occupied? What have you been consuming?
I'm still doing two things because I expected questions. I know you for some years. I'm fascinated by the work of Fernando Flores.
Okay, great.
He's Chilean, and he wrote together with a great American, Solomon. He died a few years ago. Also, a book on building trust. So I'm working on these two books also to meet him in Chile. I think it will be in January that I have time to go there. And I read a book also by Understanding Your Economy, and that's the Economy of Belongings. Perhaps you know the book.
I don't.
It's Martin Sandbu. He started 4 years ago already to a radical plan to win back the left behind and achieve prosperity for all. To study by economics also. Why did so many people vote for Trump, for instance? So, and his economic search brought him to perhaps robots and digitalization goes that far that we have to leave tons of people behind, that we can't offer other jobs because there won't be other jobs.
Yep.
I think he's right. And that's stupid that we didn't thought about these things earlier, how to replace work into other work before. So I think this is for the weekend. This is how I spend my weekends. I'm a great grandfather, having 5 grandchildren, and then spending the time reading. No, I do it most likely nightly, like you do. But also to find in all these disciplines, this time economy, to find understanding, ways of understanding our context, because it's always, you have to take everything in it. And sometimes it's psychology, sometimes it's whatever.
Yeah.
And this is what I adore. Yeah.
Well, Ted, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the perspective you bring. I know that our listeners will have plenty to think about. I've said this on this podcast before, but I love the fact that, and I love it when I'm speaking with people who bring a perspective from a different background, but ultimately that different background beautifully fits into the conversation, because we can explore this topic from so many different lenses, like you just said: economics, psychology, biology, cultural anthropology, right? It's beautiful. It's so much fun. Sir, thank you so much for being with us today. I really, really appreciate it. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Listeners are going to get tired of me talking about this, but once again, so many different lenses. So here we have a conversation rooted in geography and cultural anthropology, and Ted's approach to connecting with people really anywhere in the world. Understand, accept, respect. If we do this, and here's the practical wisdom in all of this, if we do this, then we build trust, and trust is the glue. But then we also need to have some patience, because it's going to take time to build these relationships and to build that trust. Ted, thank you so much for the work that you do, sir. And to each of our listeners, thank you. No matter where you are in the world, you have brightened my 2020, and I hope Phronesis has brightened your 2020 as well. Take care, be well, and I'm looking forward to an incredible 2021. You have been listening to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share it with others and let them know what we're up to. And one last quick reminder to click subscribe so you know when we publish new episodes. And of course, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can stay in touch with me by visiting www.scottjallen.net or any number of social media platforms. Be well, be safe, and make a difference wherever you are on this beautiful planet. And now, here's Kate's twin sister, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.